It was December 6th, 2025 at 2:47 a.m. when a dream so violent, so consuming, drove me to the valley vista outside Los Angeles, and there, surrounded by rolling hills that stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars so thick they looked like spilled diamonds across black velvet, the temperature dropping to that bone-deep cold that only exists in the hours before dawn, Jesus revealed to me what happens when believers ignore the sign that's coming this January. Not everyone who sees this message is meant to see it. Some will scroll past, some will ignore it. But you've been marked. I need you to do something right now. Before we go any further, I need you to type your prayer request in the comments. I don't care how long it is. I don't care how impossible it seems. Type it out. Because what I'm about to share with you, what Jesus showed me in that valley, it's connected to your breakthrough. It's connected to why you're watching this right now at this exact moment. And if you're a true believer, if you're someone who actually wants to hear what the Holy Spirit is saying in this hour, hit that subscribe button, because I'm telling you, YouTube doesn't want this message getting out. They don't want you to hear what's coming in January. But the remnant, the true believers, they need to be warned. They need to be prepared. Some of you know me as Jonathan Roumie, the actor who portrays Jesus in The Chosen, but I need you to understand something. What I'm about to share with you has nothing to do with a television show. This is real. This is raw. This is what happened to me in that valley, and I'm still shaking as I record this. I couldn't sleep that night. I'm 51 years old. I live alone, and there are nights when the silence in my house becomes so loud it's deafening. I'd been tossing and turning for hours, and around 2:30 a.m., I had a dream. In the dream, I saw millions of believers, good people, church-going people, people who loved Jesus, and they were all walking past a sign, a literal sign. It was glowing, pulsating with light, and it had a date on it, January 2026. But person after person after person just walked right past it. They didn't even glance at it. And as they walked past, I watched them fade, not disappear, but fade, like they were becoming transparent, becoming ghosts of what they were supposed to be. I woke up gasping, my heart hammering against my ribcage like it was trying to escape, and I heard it, not audibly, but so clearly it might as well have been audible. Go to the valley. Now. I didn't question it. I've learned not to question it. I threw on jeans, a heavy jacket, and I drove. The roads were empty, that eerie kind of empty that makes you feel like you're the last person on earth. I drove out to this place I'd discovered years ago, a valley vista about 40 minutes outside the city, where you can see rolling hills extending in every direction, where the light pollution finally gives way to real darkness, real stars, real silence. When I got there, I killed the engine and stepped out into the cold. And I mean cold. That dry, sharp cold that makes your nostrils stick together when you breathe in, that makes every breath visible, that seeps through your jacket and reminds you how fragile you really are. The temperature had to be in the low 30s, unusual for Southern California, even in December. The valley stretched out before me, illuminated by starlight and a crescent moon hanging low on the horizon. The hills rolled away in waves of shadow and silver, like a frozen ocean. I could hear absolutely nothing. No cars, no planes, no animals. Just the sound of my own breathing and the occasional whisper of wind moving through the dry grass. I walked about 50 yards from my car to a spot where the vista opens up completely, where you can see for miles. The ground was hard beneath my feet, the grass crunching with frost. I could smell the sage and the earth, that distinctive California chaparral smell that's both sweet and sharp at the same time. And then I felt it. The temperature dropped even further. My breath came out in thick clouds. The wind stopped completely, and I mean completely, like someone had pressed pause on the entire world. And the light changed. I don't know how else to describe it except to say that the starlight intensified. It was like someone had turned up the brightness on the universe. The hills went from silver to almost white, and I could see details I shouldn't have been able to see. Individual rocks, the texture of the grass, the contours of the land. And he was there. Jesus was standing about 10 feet in front of me, and he looked exactly as I'd imagined him 1,000 times, but also nothing like I'd imagined. He was wearing simple robes, his hair moving slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. His eyes, oh God, his eyes. They were filled with something I can only describe as grief mixed with fire. "Jonathan," he said, and his voice was like thunder and whispers at the same time, like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere, like it was inside my chest and all around me simultaneously. I fell to my knees, not because I decided to, but because my legs just gave out. The frost-covered grass soaked through my jeans immediately, the cold biting into my knees. But I didn't care. I couldn't care. I was in the presence of the living God. Lord, I managed to whisper, I'm here. I came. I know you did, he said, and he moved closer. I could see his feet bare against the frozen ground, and I noticed that where he stepped, the frost melted, leaving dark footprints in the silver grass. I brought you here because you need to see what I see. You need to understand what's coming in January and what happens when my people ignore the sign I'm about to give them. What sign, Lord? I asked, my voice shaking from cold and fear and awe all mixed together. He gestured toward the valley, and suddenly the landscape transformed. The rolling hills were still there, but now they were filled with people, millions of people, believers. I could somehow sense that they were believers. I could see it in their faces, in the way they carried themselves. They were good people, church people, people who prayed and read their Bibles and served in ministries. Watch, Jesus said, and I watched. In the sky above the valley, a sign appeared. It was massive, impossible to miss, glowing with golden light. It showed the month of January, and there was a specific symbol on it. I can't fully describe it, but it looked like a door and a clock merged together, and it was pulsating, alive, demanding attention. But the people in the valley, they weren't looking up. They were looking at their phones. They were looking at each other. They were busy with their lives, their routines, their plans. And one by one, they walked right past the sign without ever seeing it. This is what breaks my heart, Jesus said, and I heard actual pain in his voice. I turned to look at him, and I saw tears on his face glistening in the starlight. I am about to give my people a sign in January, a clear sign, a sign that will mark the beginning of a shift, a change, a season of separation. But most of them won't see it, not because they can't, but because they won't, because they're too distracted, too comfortable, too convinced they already know everything they need to know. What kind of sign, Lord? I asked. What should they be looking for? He turned to me, and the intensity in his eyes made me want to look away, but I couldn't. In January, I will speak to my people about their time, not just their schedules, but their time, what they're doing with the hours I've given them, what they're prioritizing, what they're ignoring. And I will give them a clear choice, align with my timing, or continue in their own. But here's what you need to understand, Jonathan. This isn't just about being busy or not busy. This is about something deeper. This is about whether my people are actually listening to me anymore, or whether they've just created a version of Christianity that fits comfortably into their lives. The wind suddenly picked up, and it was warm now, impossibly warm, carrying the scent of something I can only describe as heavenly, like flowers and incense and fresh bread all at once. The grass around us began to move in waves, and the starlight grew even brighter. Look again, he said. I looked back at the valley, and now I could see what happened to the people who walked past the sign. At first, nothing seemed to change. They kept going about their lives. But slowly, gradually, they began to fade, just like in my dream. They became transparent, ghostly. They were still there, still moving, still busy, but they were becoming less real, less solid, less present. What's happening to them? I asked, horror rising in my throat. They're becoming irrelevant to what I'm doing next, Jesus said, and his voice was heavy with sorrow. Not because I've rejected them, but because they've chosen to stay in a season I'm no longer in. They're still saved, Jonathan. They're still mine. But they're missing their moment. They're missing their purpose. They're missing the very thing I created them for, because they couldn't be bothered to look up and see the sign I put right in front of them. He knelt down beside me in the grass, and I felt the warmth radiating from him, pushing back the cold. I'm going to show you specific examples, he said. I'm going to show you exactly what I mean so you can warn them, so you can tell them what's coming. The scene in the valley shifted, and I saw a woman. She was in her 40s, attractive, well-dressed. She was in a church, leading worship, her hands raised, tears streaming down her face. She looked completely surrendered, completely in love with Jesus. She's beautiful, Lord, I said. She looks like she's really worshiping you. Watch, he said again. The scene fast-forwarded. I saw the same woman, but now it was January. She was sitting in her living room and her phone buzzed. It was a notification, a prompting from the Holy Spirit. I could somehow sense it, telling her to set aside 30 minutes every morning for the next month to seek God's face, to ask him about her time, her priorities, her purpose. It was the sign, it was the door opening. But she looked at the notification, dismissed it, and went back to scrolling through social media. I'll do it later, she muttered. I'm too busy right now. I have worship practice, and the kids have soccer, and work is crazy. She never did it, Jesus said quietly. She never set aside that time, and by February I had moved on to someone else for the assignment I had for her. She's still worshiping, she's still serving, but she's doing it in her own strength now, not mine. She's fading. The image broke my heart. I felt tears streaming down my own face, freezing on my cheeks in the cold air. "Show me another," I said, though I wasn't sure I could handle it. The valley shifted again, and I saw a man. He was younger, maybe early 30s, on fire for God. He was preaching on a street corner, bold, unashamed, powerful. "He's doing your work, Lord," I said. "Watch," Jesus said a third time. January came. The man received the same prompting, the same sign, 30 minutes a day to realign his time with God's timing. But he was too busy preaching, too busy doing ministry, too busy being seen as a man of God. He ignored the prompting. "I'm already spending time with God," he reasoned. "I'm preaching his word, that's enough." "But it wasn't what I asked him to do," Jesus said. "I didn't ask him to preach more. I asked him to listen more. I asked him to realign. And because he wouldn't, by March his ministry had become about him, not me. He's still preaching, but I'm not in it anymore. He's fading." I was sobbing now, my whole body shaking. "Lord, this is too much. This is too heavy." "It has to be heavy," he said, standing up and pulling me to my feet. "Because what's coming in January is the most important sign I've given my people in years, and most of them are going to miss it. Most of them are going to be too busy, too distracted, too convinced they're already doing enough, and they're going to fade. Not lose their salvation, but lose their purpose, lose their power, lose their moment." The wind picked up again, stronger now, and the hills around us seemed to pulse with light. The stars overhead were so bright now they looked like they were about to fall from the sky. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Why me?" "Because you'll tell them," he said. "Because you understand what it means to portray me, but you also understand that portraying me and following me are two different things. Because you're 51 years old, single, without children, and you know what it means to feel like you've missed moments, missed opportunities, because you'll be honest about your own struggles, because you'll warn them." He placed his hand on my shoulder, and the warmth that flooded through me was indescribable. It was like being filled with liquid light, like every cell in my body was suddenly alive and awake and aware. "Tomorrow night," he said. "Come back here tomorrow night. There's more you need to see. There's more you need to understand about what happens when my people ignore this sign." And then he was gone. The light returned to normal. The temperature rose slightly. The wind settled. I was alone in the valley again, on my knees in the frost-covered grass, my face wet with tears, my body trembling. I don't know how long I stayed there. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe an hour. Time felt strange, elastic. Eventually, I made my way back to my car, started the engine, turned on the heat. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. As I drove home, the sun was just beginning to hint at rising, turning the eastern sky a deep purple. The hills I'd just been standing in were becoming visible in the pre-dawn light, and they looked so normal, so ordinary. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd heard. I knew what was coming. I'm recording this now because I need you to understand. Something is coming in January. A sign, a prompting, a call to realign your time with God's timing, and most believers are going to miss it. They're going to be too busy, too distracted, too comfortable. But not you. You're watching this. You're marked. You're being warned. Tomorrow night I'm going back to that valley. Jesus told me there's more I need to see, more I need to understand, and I'm going to share it with you because you need to be prepared. You need to be ready. You need to be watching for the sign. Type "I'm watching" in the comments if you're still with me, if you're willing to hear what comes next, if you're willing to be part of the remnant that doesn't fade. Tomorrow night, same valley, more revelation. Don't miss it. I barely slept that day. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those people in the valley, fading like ghosts, still moving through their Christian lives, but becoming less and less substantial, less and less connected to what God was actually doing. I kept hearing Jesus' voice, not because I've rejected them, but because they've chosen to stay in a season I'm no longer in. By the time night fell on December 7th, I was already in my car, driving back to the valley. I left earlier this time, around 10 p.m., because I couldn't wait. I needed to know more. I needed to understand what this sign in January really meant and why it was so critical that believers pay attention to it. The temperature had dropped even further. When I checked my phone before leaving, it showed 28 degrees at the valley location. For Southern California, this was almost unheard of. As I drove through the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that even the weather was responding to what was happening. That creation itself was holding its breath for what was about to be revealed. I parked in the same spot as the night before and stepped out into air so cold it felt like inhaling knives. The sky was different tonight. Clouds had moved in, thick and low, obscuring most of the stars. The moon was hidden completely, making the darkness almost absolute. I had to use my phone's flashlight to navigate the 50 yards to the overlook. But as I approached the spot where I'd encountered Jesus the night before, the clouds began to break. Not gradually, but suddenly, like a curtain being torn in two. And the moonlight that poured through wasn't normal moonlight. It was that same intensified, almost white light I'd seen the previous night, turning the rolling hills into a landscape that looked more like another world than Southern California. The wind was fierce tonight, coming in gusts that nearly knocked me off my feet. It carried the scent of rain, though no rain was falling. The dry grass whipped around my legs, and I could hear it rustling across the hills like whispered conversations, like the earth itself was speaking in a language I couldn't quite understand. I stood at the overlook, my jacket pulled tight around me, my breath coming out in thick clouds that the wind immediately tore apart. And I waited. You came back. His voice came from behind me this time, and I spun around. Jesus was there, but he looked different tonight, more intense. His robes were moving in the wind, whipping around him, and his eyes, they weren't just filled with grief tonight. They were filled with fire, with urgency, with something that looked almost like desperation. "Of course I came back, Lord," I said, and my voice was nearly lost in the wind. "I have to understand. I have to know what you're trying to tell your people." He moved closer, and I noticed that the wind didn't touch him the same way it touched me. It moved around him, through him, but it didn't buffet him or push him. He was anchored in a way I wasn't, solid in a way I couldn't be. "Tonight, I'm going to show you the deeper truth," he said. "Last night, I showed you what happens when believers ignore the sign. Tonight, I'm going to show you why they ignore it, and what the real cost is. Because it's not just about missing an opportunity, Jonathan. It's about something much more dangerous." He turned toward the valley, and as he did, the landscape transformed again. The rolling hills were still there, but now they were divided. On one side, the hills were green, lush, alive with vegetation and streams of water that caught the moonlight. On the other side, the hills were brown, dry, cracked, dying. "Do you see?" he asked. "I see two different landscapes," I said, "but I don't understand what they mean." "The green hills represent believers who respond to the sign in January," he said. "The brown hills represent believers who ignore it. Both are still in my kingdom. Both are still saved, but only one is alive to what I'm doing now." The wind intensified, and I had to lean into it to keep from being pushed backward. My eyes were watering from the cold and the force of the air, but I couldn't look away from what he was showing me. "The sign I'm sending in January is about time," Jesus continued, his voice somehow cutting through the roar of the wind. "But not time management, not productivity, not doing more things for me. It's about alignment. It's about whether my people are living in my timing or their own. And here's what most of them don't understand. You can be doing all the right things, all the Christian things, and still be completely out of alignment with what I'm actually doing." He gestured toward the brown hills, and suddenly I could see people there. Thousands of them. They were busy, so busy. I saw them in churches, leading worship, preaching sermons, serving in soup kitchens, going on mission trips, reading their Bibles, praying with their families. They were doing everything right, everything good, everything Christian, but they looked exhausted, worn out, faded, just like the people from the night before. "What's wrong with them?" I asked. "They're doing your work, aren't they?" "They're doing work," Jesus said, and there was such sadness in his voice. "But it's not the work I assigned them, not anymore, because seasons change, Jonathan. I change what I'm doing. I shift my focus. I move in new directions, and I expect my people to move with me. But most of them are so invested in what they've been doing, so comfortable with their routines, so convinced they've figured out how to be a good Christian, that they can't hear me when I say, 'Stop, listen, realign. I'm doing something new.'" A gust of wind hit me so hard I actually stumbled, and Jesus reached out and steadied me. His hand on my arm was warm, impossibly warm, and the warmth spread through my whole body, pushing back the cold. "In January," he said, "I'm going to speak to every believer who's willing to listen. I'm going to give them a clear instruction. Set aside 30 minutes every day for 30 days, not to pray more, not to read more Bible, but to ask me one specific question. What season am I in, and what are you asking me to do in this season?" That's the sign. That's the door. That's the realignment. He let go of my arm and turned back to the valley. But most of them won't do it. Do you know why? I shook my head, though I was starting to understand. Because they're afraid of what I might say, he continued. They're afraid I might tell them to stop doing something they've built their identity around. They're afraid I might redirect them away from something that makes them feel important or needed or spiritual. They're afraid of change, so they'll ignore the prompting. They'll dismiss it as just another Christian challenge. They'll tell themselves they're already spending enough time with me, and they'll stay on the brown hills, getting drier and drier, more and more exhausted, wondering why they don't feel my presence like they used to. The scene in the valley shifted, and I saw a specific woman. She was in her 50s, gray hair pulled back in a bun, wearing a church volunteer badge. She was setting up chairs in a fellowship hall, and she looked tired, bone tired, soul tired. Tell me about her, I said. Her name is Margaret, Jesus said. She's been serving in her church for 23 years, children's ministry, hospitality team, prayer chain coordinator. She's faithful, she's dedicated. Everyone in her church knows her and loves her. She's the backbone of that congregation. She sounds amazing, I said. She is, Jesus agreed. But 3 years ago, I started prompting her to step back from children's ministry. Not because she was doing anything wrong, but because I had a new assignment for her, intercessory prayer for the persecuted church. I kept speaking to her about it, kept putting it on her heart, kept showing her visions of believers in other countries who needed prayer coverage. But she ignored it, because children's ministry was her identity. It was what she was known for. It was where she felt valuable. The scene fast-forwarded, and I saw Margaret in January 2026. She was sitting in her living room, and I could sense the Holy Spirit prompting her. The sign, the 30 minutes a day, the question about seasons. She felt it. I could see it on her face. But then she shook her head and stood up. I don't have time for this, she muttered. I have curriculum to prepare for Sunday school. She'll ignore it, Jesus said. And by the end of January, I'll raise up someone else for the intercessory assignment I had for her. Someone who will listen, someone who will realign. And Margaret will continue serving in children's ministry, getting more and more tired, more and more burned out, wondering why she doesn't feel fulfilled anymore, why her prayers feel like they're bouncing off the ceiling. I felt anger rising in my chest. Why don't you just tell her directly? Why don't you make it so clear she can't ignore it? Jesus turned to me, and the look in his eyes made me take a step back. I have told her directly, Jonathan, dozens of times, through promptings, through other believers, through circumstances, through dreams. But she won't listen because she doesn't want to hear. And that's the real issue. It's not that my people can't hear me. It's that they've decided what they want me to say, and anything else gets filtered out. The wind suddenly stopped. Completely. The air became perfectly still, and in that stillness I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and fast. The temperature seemed to drop even further, and I started shivering uncontrollably. Show me another, I said through chattering teeth. I need to understand this completely. The valley shifted again, and I saw a man. He was young, maybe late 20s, with a beard and tattoos, leading a Bible study in what looked like a coffee shop. He was animated, passionate, and the people around him were engaged, leaning in, taking notes. His name is David, Jesus said. He's a marketplace minister. He doesn't work for a church, but he's reaching people who would never step foot in a church building. He's effective. He's anointed. He's doing exactly what I called him to do. So what's the problem? I asked. There's no problem right now, Jesus said, but in January I'm going to ask him to stop. Stop? Why would you ask him to stop something that's working? Because the season is changing, Jesus said patiently. Because I'm about to do something new in his city, and I need him in a different position. I'm going to ask him to step back from leading for 6 months and instead focus on training others to lead. I'm going to ask him to multiply himself instead of just being effective himself, but he's going to resist it. The scene fast-forwarded to January. I saw David receiving the prompting, 30 minutes a day, the question about seasons. He started to do it. For 3 days, he actually set aside the time. But on the 4th day, someone from his Bible study called with a crisis, and he skipped his 30 minutes to help them. On the 5th day, he was too tired. On the 6th day, he forgot. By the 7th day, he'd convinced himself it wasn't that important. He never heard what I was trying to tell him, Jesus said, because he never gave me enough consistent time to speak it, and by February, he'll be so busy maintaining what he's built that he'll completely miss the new thing I'm doing. Other leaders will rise up, leaders he could have trained, and they'll take the movement to the next level while David stays stuck doing the same thing, wondering why he feels like he's plateaued. I was crying now, tears freezing on my face. This is heartbreaking, Lord. These are good people. They love you. They're serving you. I know, he said, and his own voice was thick with emotion. That's why it breaks my heart. That's why I'm sending this warning. That's why I'm giving them a clear sign in January. Because I don't want them to fade. I don't want them to miss their moment. I don't want them to spend years serving me in the wrong season, getting more and more exhausted, more and more frustrated, wondering why they don't feel my presence anymore. The clouds overhead began to move again, swirling in patterns that didn't look natural. The moonlight flickered and pulsed, and the hills around us seemed to ripple like water. There's a third example I need to show you, Jesus said. This one is the hardest. The valley transformed once more, and I saw a pastor. He was in his 40s, standing behind a pulpit in a large church, preaching to hundreds of people. His sermon was powerful, biblical, anointed. People were weeping, raising their hands, responding to the altar call. He's amazing, I said. That's real anointing. It is, Jesus agreed. His name is Pastor Michael. He's been leading this church for 12 years. He's grown it from 50 people to 500. He's a gifted teacher, a caring shepherd, a faithful servant. I love him deeply. So what's going to happen to him? Jesus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. In January, I'm going to ask him to resign. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. What? Why? He's doing everything right. Because the season is over, Jesus said. Because I'm raising up someone else to lead that church into the next phase, and Michael's gifting isn't for that phase. I have a different assignment for him, writing, teaching on a broader platform, influencing leaders across the nation, but he'll never step into it if he stays in that pulpit, and he's going to refuse to leave. The scene showed January. Pastor Michael received the prompting, 30 minutes a day, the question about seasons. He did it. He actually did it faithfully for 2 weeks, and I could see the moment when he heard what God was saying. I could see the recognition on his face, the understanding that his season at that church was complete. But then I watched him shake his head. No, he said out loud. That can't be you. I've built this church. These people need me. My identity is here. My salary is here. My reputation is here. That's not your voice. That's fear or doubt or the enemy. And he stopped doing the 30 minutes. He stopped asking the question. He convinced himself he'd misheard. By March, Jesus said, the church will start declining, not because Michael is doing anything wrong, but because I've lifted my hand from that season. By June, there will be division in the leadership. By September, there will be a split. And by the end of the year, Michael will be forced out anyway, but in pain, in conflict, in confusion, instead of in peace and purpose. And he'll spend years bitter and wounded instead of stepping into the new thing I had for him. I was on my knees now, sobbing into the frozen grass. Lord, this is too much. This is too heavy. How do I tell people this? How do I warn them? He knelt beside me again, and I felt his hand on my back, warm and solid and real. You tell them the truth, he said. You tell them that I love them too much to let them stay comfortable in the wrong season. You tell them that the sign in January is an act of mercy, not judgment. You tell them that 30 minutes a day for 30 days could be the difference between fading and flourishing, between missing their moment and stepping into their destiny. The wind picked up again, warmer now, carrying that same heavenly scent from the night before. The clouds overhead began to break apart, and stars appeared, more stars than should have been visible, turning the sky into a tapestry of light. There's one more night, Jesus said, helping me to my feet. Tomorrow night, I'm going to show you the final piece. I'm going to show you what happens to those who do respond to the sign, and I'm going to give you the specific instructions to share with my people. But I'm also going to show you the judgment that's coming for those who refuse to listen. He looked at me with such intensity that I felt it in my bones. This isn't a game, Jonathan. This isn't just another Christian message that people can take or leave. This is a defining moment. This is a separation point. This is where I'm dividing those who truly want to follow me from those who just want to use me to validate their own plans. And then he was gone again. I stood there in the valley for a long time, watching the clouds continue to break apart, watching the stars multiply overhead, feeling the wind shift from cold to warm and back to cold again. The hills around me looked so peaceful, so normal, but I knew what I'd seen. I knew what was coming. I'm telling you this now because you need to prepare. You need to start asking yourself the hard questions. Are you doing what God called you to do, or what you've always done? Are you in the season He's in, or the season you're comfortable with? Are you willing to hear Him if He tells you to change, to stop, to redirect? Because in January, He's going to ask you. He's going to give you the sign, and what you do with it will determine whether you flourish or fade in the next season. Tomorrow night is the final encounter. Tomorrow night, Jesus is going to show me the judgment and the promise, and I'm going to share every word of it with you. Type "I'm ready" in the comments if you're willing to hear the final revelation, if you're willing to be part of the remnant that responds instead of resists. One more night, one more encounter, one more chance to understand what's coming. Don't miss it. December 8th, 2025. I woke up that morning with a sense of dread so heavy it felt like a physical weight on my chest. I knew tonight would be different. I knew tonight would be the culmination of everything Jesus had been showing me, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. I spent the day in prayer, in fasting, in preparation. I'm 51 years old, and I've had spiritual experiences before, moments of clarity, times of deep connection with God, but nothing like what had happened in that valley the previous 2 nights. Nothing that had shaken me to my core the way these encounters had. As the sun began to set, I felt the pull again, that unmistakable sense that I needed to return to the valley. But this time, there was something else mixed in with it. A sense of urgency, almost panic, like if I didn't go right now, I would miss something crucial. I left my house at 9:30 p.m., earlier than the previous nights. The drive felt different this time. The roads weren't just empty, they felt abandoned, like I was driving through a world that had already ended. The streetlights seemed dimmer. The few cars I passed looked like ghosts, there and gone in an instant. When I arrived at the valley, I immediately knew something was different. The temperature wasn't just cold, it was Arctic. My car's thermometer read 24 degrees, the coldest it had been yet. But more than that, the atmosphere felt charged, electric, like the air before a massive thunderstorm. I stepped out of my car, and the wind hit me like a wall. It wasn't gusting anymore. It was constant, powerful, roaring across the hills with a sound like a freight train. I had to lean into it at a 45-degree angle just to walk, and even then, I was being pushed backward with every step. The sky was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The clouds were back, but they were moving in ways clouds shouldn't move, swirling, churning, forming patterns that looked almost intentional. And the light, there was light coming from somewhere, but it wasn't the moon or stars. It was coming from the clouds themselves, pulsing in shades of gold and white, and something that looked almost like fire. I made my way to the overlook, my jacket whipping around me, my eyes watering from the wind, my hands already numb from the cold. The rolling hills stretched out before me, but they looked different tonight. They looked alive, moving, breathing, like the earth itself was responding to what was about to happen. And then the wind stopped. Not gradually, instantly. 1 second it was roaring, and the next second there was absolute silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring, that feels oppressive, that makes you aware of every heartbeat, every breath. The temperature plummeted even further. I could see my breath, thick and white, hanging in the air in front of me like fog. The grass beneath my feet crackled with ice, and the light from the clouds intensified until the entire valley was illuminated like midday, but with a quality of light that didn't exist in nature. Jonathan. His voice came from everywhere at once, from the sky, from the ground, from inside my own chest. And when I turned, Jesus was there, but he looked different than the previous 2 nights. He looked bigger, more solid, more real than anything else in the landscape. His robes were brilliant white, almost painful to look at. His eyes were like flames, and his face held an expression I can only describe as holy rage mixed with desperate love. I fell flat on my face. Not to my knees this time. All the way down, my face pressed against the frozen ground, my body trembling uncontrollably. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I was in the presence of the Almighty God, and every cell in my body knew it. "Stand up," he said, and his voice was like thunder. "You need to see this. You need to witness what's coming, so you can warn them with the full weight of truth." I struggled to my feet, my legs barely supporting me. He was standing at the edge of the overlook, looking out over the valley, and as I moved beside him, the landscape transformed one final time. The valley was filled with people again, millions of them, stretching as far as I could see across the rolling hills. But this time they were divided into two distinct groups. On the left side, the people were glowing, radiant, moving with purpose and power. On the right side, the people were gray, faded, moving in circles, going through motions. This is what it will look like by the end of 2026, Jesus said. This is the separation that's coming, not a separation of saved and unsaved. Both groups are mine, both groups are in my kingdom, but a separation of those who are alive to what I'm doing and those who are dead to it while still going through the motions. He pointed to the group on the left, the glowing ones. These are the ones who responded to the sign in January. These are the ones who set aside 30 minutes a day for 30 days and asked me the question, what season am I in, and what are you asking me to do in this season? These are the ones who heard my answer and obeyed, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it meant change, even when it cost them something. The scene zoomed in, and I could see individuals in that group. I saw Margaret, the woman from the night before who'd been serving in children's ministry. But in this timeline, she had responded to the January sign. She had done the 30 minutes. She had heard God's call to intercessory prayer for the persecuted church, and now I saw her in a prayer room, surrounded by maps and photos, weeping over nations, and I could see the spiritual impact. I could literally see prayers like golden threads shooting out from her and connecting to believers in China, in Iran, in North Korea, strengthening them, protecting them, empowering them. She found her true assignment, Jesus said, and because she did, thousands of believers in hostile nations are being sustained by her prayers. That's her real purpose. That's what I created her for, but she would have missed it if she'd ignored the sign. I saw David, the marketplace minister. In this timeline, he had also responded. He had heard God's call to step back from leading and focus on training others, and now I saw him in a room with a dozen young leaders pouring into them, multiplying himself, and I could see the ripple effect, those leaders going out and starting their own movements, reaching thousands, and all of it traced back to David's willingness to decrease so others could increase. He became a father instead of just a minister, Jesus said. He became a multiplier instead of just a doer, and the kingdom impact is exponential, but he would have missed it if he'd ignored the sign. I saw Pastor Michael. In this timeline, he had responded to the call to resign from his church. I saw him writing books, speaking at conferences, mentoring pastors across the nation. His influence had grown tenfold, and the church he'd left had thrived under new leadership that was better suited for the next season. He stepped into his true calling, Jesus said. He became who I created him to be, but he would have missed it if he'd ignored the sign. Tears were streaming down my face, freezing on my cheeks. This is beautiful, Lord. This is what you want for all of them. Yes, he said, but now you need to see the other side. He pointed to the group on the right, the faded ones, and my heart sank. The scene zoomed in, and I saw the alternate timeline for the same people. I saw Margaret, still serving in children's ministry, but she looked exhausted, burned out, going through the motions. The children in her class looked bored. Her prayers felt empty, and I could see believers in hostile nations who were suffering, being imprisoned, being martyred, because the prayer coverage they were supposed to have, the coverage Margaret was supposed to provide, wasn't there. She missed her assignment, Jesus said, and his voice was heavy with grief. And people suffered because of it, not because she was evil, but because she was disobedient, because she chose comfort over calling. I saw David still leading his Bible study, but it had plateaued. The same people came every week, but there was no growth, no multiplication. And I could see young leaders who were supposed to be raised up, who were supposed to start movements, but they were floundering, directionless, because David wasn't there to train them. He stayed in the wrong season, Jesus said, and a generation of leaders was stunted because of it. I saw Pastor Michael still in his pulpit, but the church was declining. There was division in the leadership. People were leaving, and I could see the books he was supposed to write, the leaders he was supposed to mentor, the national impact he was supposed to have. All of it unrealized, all of it lost, because he refused to leave when I called him to leave. He chose his identity over his destiny, Jesus said, and both he and the kingdom suffered for it. I was sobbing now, my whole body shaking with grief. Lord, please, how do I make them understand? How do I make them see what's at stake? The sky above us suddenly split open. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like the clouds were torn apart by invisible hands, and light poured through, not sunlight or moonlight, but something else entirely, something that made me want to shield my eyes, but also made me unable to look away. You tell them this, Jesus said, and his voice was like thunder and whispers and music all at once. You tell them that I am sending a sign in January 2026. Every believer who is truly mine will feel it, a prompting, a call, an invitation to set aside 30 minutes every day for 30 days. Not to pray more, not to read more Bible, but to ask one specific question. What season am I in, and what are you asking me to do in this season? The light from the sky intensified, and I could feel heat radiating from it, pushing back the cold. The hills around us began to glow, and I could hear something. Music, maybe, or voices, or something beyond both. You tell them that this is not optional, Jesus continued. This is not just another Christian challenge they can take or leave. This is a defining moment. This is where I separate those who truly want to follow me from those who just want to use me to validate their own plans. This is where I divide the living from the dead, the fruitful from the faded, the obedient from the comfortable. He turned to face me fully, and the intensity in his eyes made me want to fall down again, but he held me up with a look. You tell them that if they ignore this sign, they will not lose their salvation. They will still be mine, but they will fade. They will become irrelevant to what I'm doing next. They will spend the next season, and possibly the rest of their lives, doing Christian things in their own strength, wondering why they don't feel my presence, wondering why their prayers feel empty, wondering why they're so tired. The ground beneath us began to shake, not violently but rhythmically, like a heartbeat, like the earth itself was responding to his words. But you also tell them this, he said, and his voice softened, filled with such love it made my chest ache. If they respond to the sign, if they do the 30 minutes for 30 days, if they ask the question and listen for my answer and obey what I tell them, even if it's hard, even if it means change, even if it costs them something, I will open doors they never imagined. I will give them assignments that fit who I created them to be. I will put them in the center of what I'm doing next, and they will experience a level of purpose, power, and presence they've never known before. The shaking stopped. The light from the sky began to soften. The temperature started to rise slightly, and Jesus placed both hands on my shoulders, looking directly into my eyes. There's a cost to obedience, he said, but there's a greater cost to disobedience. And most of my people have never understood that. They think disobedience just means missing out on blessings. But it means so much more than that. It means missing out on purpose. It means missing out on the very reason I created them. It means living a Christian life that looks good on the outside, but is dead on the inside. He released my shoulders and stepped back. I'm giving you the words to say, I'm giving you the warning to deliver. And I'm giving you 30 days from when you release this message to prepare my people, because in January, the sign is coming, and what they do with it will determine the trajectory of the rest of their lives. The light from the sky was fading now, and the clouds were beginning to close back up. The stars were appearing again, normal stars this time, and the moon was visible on the horizon, casting silver light across the hills. There's one more thing you need to tell them, Jesus said, and he was starting to fade, becoming translucent. Tell them about the scripture. Tell them that this isn't new. Tell them that I've always operated this way. And suddenly verses began appearing in the air around us, glowing with golden light. To him who has ears to hear, let him hear. Matthew 11:15. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. John 10:27. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Hebrews 3:15. For the time has come for judgment to begin at the house of God. 1 Peter 4:17. I know your works, that you are neither cold nor hot. I could wish you were cold or hot. So then, because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will vomit you out of my mouth. Revelation 3:15-16. The verses hung in the air, burning themselves into my memory, and then they faded along with Jesus' form. Remember, his voice came one last time, now just a whisper on the wind. January, 30 minutes a day for 30 days. One question. What season am I in, and what are you asking me to do in this season? Everything depends on their response. And then he was gone. The valley returned to normal. The temperature was still cold, but not Arctic. The wind was blowing, but not roaring. The sky was just a normal night sky with normal clouds and normal stars. But I was not normal. I was changed. I was marked. I was carrying a message that felt too heavy for one person to bear. I stood there for over an hour, just processing, just trying to absorb everything I'd seen and heard. The rolling hills stretched out before me, peaceful and quiet, and it was hard to believe that just minutes before they'd been filled with millions of people, divided into two groups, living out two completely different destinies based on one choice. When I finally made my way back to my car, the sun was just beginning to hint at rising. The eastern sky was turning that deep purple that comes before dawn, and the hills were becoming visible in the pre-dawn light. They looked so ordinary, so normal, so unchanged. But I was changed, and if you're hearing this message, you're about to be changed too, because in January 2026, Jesus is sending a sign, a prompting, a call, and what you do with it will determine whether you flourish or fade, whether you step into your true purpose or stay stuck in comfortable Christianity, whether you become part of what God is doing next or become irrelevant to it. Tomorrow, I'm going to give you the practical application. I'm going to tell you exactly what to do, how to prepare, how to respond when the sign comes. I'm going to give you the 30-minute daily challenge that will change everything. But tonight, I need you to sit with what I've shared. I need you to ask yourself the hard questions. I need you to examine your life, your ministry, your service, and ask, am I doing what God called me to do or what I've always done? Am I in His season or my own? Type, I'm ready to change in the comments if you're willing to respond to the sign when it comes. If you're willing to ask the hard question and obey the answer, even if it costs you something. One more night, one more message, the practical application that will prepare you for January. Don't miss it. It's been 3 days since that final encounter in the valley, and I'm still shaking. I'm recording this on December 11th, 2025, and I need to tell you what happened after Jesus left, what I've experienced since then, and most importantly, what you need to do right now to prepare for what's coming in January. Yesterday, I went back to the valley one more time, not because Jesus called me there, but because I needed to see it again in the daylight. I needed to stand in that place where heaven touched earth and remember that it was real, that it actually happened, that I didn't imagine it. I arrived around 2 p.m., and the contrast was startling. The valley that had been so dramatic, so charged with supernatural power, looked completely ordinary. The rolling hills stretched out under a clear blue sky. The grass was brown and dry like it always is in December, and there were even a few other people there, hikers with their dogs, a couple taking photos, someone sitting on a blanket reading a book. I walked to the exact spot where I'd encountered Jesus 3 nights in a row, and I stood there for a long time. The ground beneath my feet was just ground, the air was just air, the temperature was a normal 55 degrees. There was nothing supernatural about it at all, but I could still feel it. I could still sense the echo of what had happened there. And as I stood there, looking out over those hills, I heard His voice one more time, not audibly, but clearly in my spirit. Now tell them what to do. So that's what I'm doing right now. In this final message, I'm going to give you the practical application, the specific steps, the exact challenge that will prepare you for the sign that's coming in January. And I need you to listen carefully because this isn't just information. This is activation. But first, I need to be vulnerable with you about something. I need to tell you why this message has wrecked me so completely. I'm 51 years old. I'm single. I don't have children. And for years, I've struggled with the question of whether I've missed my moment, whether I've wasted time, whether I've been obedient to everything God has called me to do. Playing Jesus in The Chosen has been the honor of my lifetime, but it's also made me acutely aware of the gap between portraying Jesus and actually following Jesus, between knowing what He said and doing what He said. When Jesus showed me those people in the valley, the ones who were fading because they ignored His call to realign, I saw myself. I saw the times I've been too busy to listen, the times I've been too comfortable to change, the times I've convinced myself that what I'm doing is good enough, so I don't need to ask if it's what He's actually asking me to do. And I realized something that terrified me. It's possible to spend your entire life doing Christian things and completely miss what God created you for. It's possible to be busy for Jesus and not be obedient to Jesus. It's possible to look successful in ministry and be a complete failure in the eyes of heaven. That's why this message is so urgent. That's why I'm begging you to pay attention, because I don't want you to get to the end of your life and realize you spent it in the wrong season, doing the wrong things, missing the assignments that actually mattered. So here's what you need to do. Here's the practical application. Here's how you prepare for the sign that's coming in January. Step 1. Starting today, right now, as soon as you finish watching this, I want you to set aside 30 minutes. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today. And I want you to do something you probably haven't done in a long time. I want you to sit in complete silence before God and ask Him one question. Am I doing what You've called me to do, or what I've always done? Don't pray. Don't read your Bible. Don't worship. Just sit in silence and ask that question, and then wait. Listen. Pay attention to what comes up in your spirit. You might feel uncomfortable. You might feel convicted. You might feel confused. That's okay. Just sit with it. Write down anything that comes to mind, any promptings, any thoughts, any uncomfortable feelings. This is practice for January. This is preparation for the sign. Because when the prompting comes in January, and it will come, I promise you it will come, you need to already be in the habit of listening, of sitting still, of being willing to hear things that might make you uncomfortable. Step 2. I want you to make a list of everything you're currently doing in your Christian life. Everything. Your church commitments, your ministry roles, your service activities, your Bible studies, your prayer groups, everything. Write it all down. And then I want you to go through that list and honestly ask yourself, did God tell me to do this? Or did I just start doing it because it seemed like a good Christian thing to do? Did God tell me to continue doing this, or am I just doing it out of habit or obligation or because people expect it from me? Be brutally honest, because here's what Jesus showed me in that valley. Most Christians are doing things God never asked them to do, and they're so busy doing those things that they can't hear Him when He tries to redirect them. I'm not saying everything on your list is wrong. I'm saying you need to know which things are actually assignments from God and which things are just religious activity. Because in January, God might tell you to stop some things. And if you're not willing to stop, you'll miss what He's trying to start. Step 3. I want you to identify the one thing in your life that you're most afraid God might ask you to change. The one ministry, the one role, the one activity that you've built your identity around that makes you feel valuable, that makes you feel spiritual. Write it down. And then I want you to pray this prayer. And I'm warning you, this is a dangerous prayer. God, if this thing is not your assignment for me in this season, I give you permission to take it away. I give you permission to redirect me. I give you permission to change my life, even if it's uncomfortable. That's the prayer that will prepare you for January. That's the prayer that will keep you from ignoring the sign when it comes. Because if you're not willing to surrender the thing you're most attached to, you'll rationalize away God's voice when He asks you to let it go. Step 4. Starting today and continuing through the end of December, I want you to practice the 30-minute daily challenge. Every single day, set aside 30 minutes to sit before God and ask, what season am I in, and what are you asking me to do in this season? This is the exact question Jesus told me to give you. This is the question that will be at the heart of the sign in January, and if you start practicing it now, you'll be ready when the real prompting comes. Here's how to do it practically. Find a quiet place where you won't be interrupted. Set a timer for 30 minutes. Sit in silence for the first 10 minutes. Just be still. Let your mind settle. Let the noise of the day fade away. For the next 10 minutes, ask the question out loud. What season am I in, and what are you asking me to do in this season? Then listen. Pay attention to thoughts, impressions, scriptures that come to mind, feelings in your spirit. For the final 10 minutes, write down everything you sensed, even if it doesn't make sense, even if it makes you uncomfortable, even if it contradicts what you thought God wanted from you. Do this every single day through December. And by the time January comes, you'll be so tuned into God's voice that when the sign comes, when the real prompting hits, you'll recognize it immediately and you'll be ready to respond. Now here's the urgent part. Here's the deadline. Jesus told me that the sign is coming in January 2026, and believers will have 30 days to respond to it. 30 days to do the 30-minute daily challenge. 30 days to ask the question and listen for the answer and obey what God tells them. That means the window closes at the end of January. By February 1st, 2026, the separation will have begun. Those who responded will be moving into their true assignments, their real purpose, the center of what God is doing next. Those who ignored it will be fading, becoming irrelevant to the next move of God, stuck in the old season while God moves on without them. I know that sounds harsh, I know that sounds extreme, but I'm telling you what Jesus told me. I'm giving you the warning He gave me to deliver, and I would rather offend you with the truth than comfort you with a lie. So here's what I need you to do right now. First, leave a comment below and tell me honestly, are you willing to do this? Are you willing to set aside 30 minutes a day through December to prepare? Are you willing to ask the hard question and obey the answer, even if it costs you something? Type I'm all in if you're committed. Type I'm afraid but willing if you're scared but you're going to do it anyway. Be honest. This is between you and God. Second, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already and turn on notifications, because I'm going to be posting updates through December and January. I'm going to be sharing what God is showing me, what I'm hearing in my own 30-minute sessions, and I'm going to be checking in with you to see how you're doing. We're in this together. You're not alone. Third, Share this video. I know that sounds self-serving, but I'm not asking you to share it for me. I'm asking you to share it because there are people in your life who need this warning. There are believers in your church, in your family, in your friend group who are about to miss the sign in January because no one warned them. Share this video. Tag people. Send it directly to people you know need to hear it. This is too important to keep to yourself. Fourth, start today. Don't wait. Don't tell yourself you'll start tomorrow or next week. The enemy's greatest weapon is delay. He doesn't need to make you reject God's call. He just needs to make you postpone responding to it until the window closes. Start your 30 minutes today, right now, as soon as you finish watching this. Now, I need to tell you what I've experienced since I started doing this myself, because I've been doing the 30-minute daily challenge since December 9th, the day after the final encounter, and it's already changing my life. On the first day, I sat in silence and asked the question, and I felt nothing. Just silence. Just my own thoughts bouncing around. I almost gave up after 15 minutes because it felt pointless. But I stayed the full 30 minutes, and right at the end, I had a thought that I know wasn't my own. You're doing too much talking and not enough listening. That hit me hard, because it's true. I'm always talking to God in prayer, talking about God in conversations, talking as Jesus in The Chosen. But when do I actually listen? When do I actually shut up long enough to hear what he's trying to say? On the second day, I asked the question again, and this time I got something more specific. You're in a season of preparation, not performance. And I immediately wanted to argue with it because I'm an actor. Performance is what I do. It's how I serve God. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized that God might be preparing me for something beyond acting, something I can't even see yet, and I need to be willing to let go of my identity as a performer to step into whatever he has next. On the third day, yesterday, I asked the question, and what came up was terrifying. You're afraid of being ordinary. And it's true. I'm afraid that if I'm not playing Jesus, if I'm not on a screen, if I'm not recognized, then I'm not valuable. And God is asking me to surrender that fear, to be willing to be completely unknown and ordinary if that's what he asks, because my value isn't in what I do, it's in who he says I am. I'm sharing this with you because I want you to know that this process is hard, it's uncomfortable, it brings up things you don't want to look at, but it's also the most important work you'll ever do, because it's the work of aligning your life with God's actual will instead of your assumptions about his will. And here's what I'm discovering. The more I do this, the more I realize how much of my Christian life has been about me trying to serve God on my terms instead of surrendering to his terms. How much of my ministry has been about building my own kingdom instead of his. How much of my service has been about feeling valuable instead of being obedient. That's what Jesus meant when he talked about believers fading. It's not that they stop being Christians. It's that they become Christians who are serving themselves while using God's name, and there's nothing more tragic than that. So let me tell you what's at stake here. Let me paint the picture one more time of what your life could look like if you respond to the sign in January versus if you ignore it. If you respond, by February, you'll have clarity about what season you're in and what God is actually asking you to do. You might discover that you need to step down from a ministry you've been leading for years. You might discover that you need to start something new that terrifies you. You might discover that you need to stop doing 10 things so you can focus on the one thing God actually called you to do. It will be uncomfortable. People might not understand. You might lose some recognition or status or identity, but you'll be in the center of God's will, and there's no better place to be. By mid-2026, you'll be operating in your true assignment. You'll be doing what God created you to do, and you'll feel it. You'll have a sense of purpose and power and presence that you've never experienced before. Your prayers will be effective, your service will be fruitful, your life will matter in ways you never imagined. By the end of 2026, you'll look back and realize that responding to the sign in January was the most important decision you ever made. You'll see the fruit. You'll see the impact. You'll see how God used your obedience to accomplish things you never could have accomplished in your own strength. If you ignore it, by February, you'll have convinced yourself that the prompting wasn't really from God. You'll have rationalized it away. You'll have told yourself you're already doing enough, you're already serving God, you don't need to change anything. By mid-2026, you'll start feeling it, that sense of dryness, that feeling that your prayers are bouncing off the ceiling, that awareness that something is missing, but you can't quite put your finger on what. You'll be busier than ever, but you'll be exhausted. You'll be serving more than ever, but you'll be empty. By the end of 2026, you'll be going through the motions. You'll still be a Christian. You'll still go to church. You'll still serve in your ministries. but you'll be faded, transparent, irrelevant to what God is actually doing. And you might not even realize it because you'll be surrounded by other faded Christians who are all telling each other that they're fine, that they're doing great, that they're serving God faithfully. And you'll spend years, maybe the rest of your life, in that state, wondering why you don't feel God's presence like you used to, wondering why your service feels so empty, wondering why you're so tired. That's what's at stake. That's why this matters. That's why I'm begging you to pay attention. Now, let me address something I know some of you are thinking. Jonathan, how do I know this is really from God? How do I know you're not just making this up or deceiving yourself? Fair question. Here's my answer. Test it. When January comes and you feel the prompting to do the 30-minute daily challenge, test it against Scripture. Test it against the character of God. Test it by actually doing it and seeing what fruit it produces in your life. But here's what I know. God has always operated this way. He's always called his people to specific obedience in specific seasons. He called Noah to build an ark when there was no rain. He called Abraham to leave his country when he was comfortable. He called Moses to confront Pharaoh when he was a stuttering shepherd. He called David to face Goliath when he was a teenage musician. He called the disciples to leave their nets when they were successful fishermen. God's call always requires change. It always requires risk. It always requires surrendering what's comfortable for what's obedient. And it always separates those who truly want to follow him from those who just want to use him to validate their own plans. So when the sign comes in January, you'll know it's from God because it will require something from you. It will ask you to change. It will make you uncomfortable. And your response to that discomfort will reveal whether you're truly surrendered to God or just using Christianity as a way to feel good about yourself. Here's my final word to you. You've been marked. The fact that you've watched this entire series, that you've made it all the way to the end of this final message, that you're hearing these words right now, that's not an accident. You've been chosen to receive this warning. You've been selected to be part of the remnant that responds instead of resists. But being marked doesn't guarantee anything. You still have to choose. You still have to respond. You still have to do the work. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Are you all in? Are you willing to set aside 30 minutes a day through December to prepare? Are you willing to ask the hard question in January and obey the answer, even if it costs you everything? If your answer is yes, then start today, right now. Turn off this video, find a quiet place, set a timer for 30 minutes, and ask God, what season am I in, and what are you asking me to do in this season? And then listen, really listen. Write down what you hear, and be willing to obey no matter what it costs. If your answer is no, if you're not willing, then I want you to be honest about that too. Don't pretend. Don't fake it. Just acknowledge that you're choosing comfort over calling and accept the consequences of that choice. But if your answer is, I'm afraid, but I'm willing, then welcome to the remnant. Welcome to the group of believers who are going to step into their true purpose in 2026. Welcome to the ones who won't fade, who won't become irrelevant, who won't miss their moment. I'm going to leave you with the image that's been burned into my mind since that final night in the valley. I'm standing there at the overlook, looking out over those rolling hills, and Jesus is beside me. The sun is just starting to rise, painting the hills in shades of gold and orange and pink. And he says to me, this is what I'm offering my people, a new dawn, a new season, a new beginning. But they have to be willing to leave the night behind. They have to be willing to step out of the darkness of the old season and into the light of the new one. And most of them won't do it because they've grown comfortable in the dark. But you're going to call them into the light. You're going to show them what's possible. You're going to be a voice crying in the wilderness. Prepare the way of the Lord. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm calling you into the light. I'm showing you what's possible. I'm preparing you for what's coming. The sign is coming in January 2026. The 30-day window will open. And what you do with it will determine the trajectory of the rest of your life. Don't miss it. Don't ignore it. Don't fade. Step into the light. Step into your purpose. Step into what God created you for. I'll see you in the comments. I'll see you in January. And I'll see you in the new season that's coming for those who are willing to respond. Type, I'm stepping into the light if you're ready. Type it right now. Make the declaration, make the commitment, and then start your 30 minutes today. This is Jonathan Roumie, and I'm not just an actor who plays Jesus. I'm a follower of Jesus who's been marked, who's been warned, who's been given a message to deliver, and I've delivered it. Now it's up to you.